agenda quickly. And then I thought, since we're all here for the first time, we should just go around and do introductions of the group. And then we have two new members, Paula and David, that will introduce themselves first, and then maybe we can go around and do the whole group. But let's just run through the agenda quickly. We are, after introductions, we will settle into just transitions reflection, concentrating on the September letter that was sent to the council. And then we'll move into at 10:15 open discussion on reviewing kind of the core focus of this meeting that will morph into sketching out the next 1 to 2 years for climate council work and process and what that looks like. We'll have a break at 11:30 and then come back at 11:45 to, again, kind of get back into the what are our priorities? What does the climate council look like for the next 1 to 2 years, and refining strategies and timelines. We'll have lunch at 12:30. And I think lunch is provided, right? Thank you, Jane. Lunch is provided. We'll come back at 1 for public engagement and presentation and discussion. Then at 1:45, we'll have public comment. 2 o'clock, we'll have final reflections. And then hopefully, if all goes as planned, 2:30, we'll adjourn. Any comments, changes, additions to the agenda? No? Okay, so why don't, Paula, do you want to start, introduce yourself, and then we'll go to David, and then start back with Ryan.
Great, so I'm Paula Melton. I'm from Brattleboro. I am a member of Brattleboro's Strange Representative Town Meeting and have been for, I think might be my 9th year. I just got reelected. And in my day job, I work for a company called Building Green, where I'm editorial director. I do a lot of writing and research and editing about green building issues, including climate and climate justice issues.
Thank you.
Which seat you're taking?
Oh yeah, the municipal representative.
And can I do a sound check with that and see if folks can? Maybe you can tell us. Can you hear Paula from your vantage point online?
Yep, we heard Paula.
Okay, great. We only have 2 mics in the room.
If I could, when the air system goes on in here, I had trouble hearing you and whoever was speaking. As soon as the air system went off, everybody was fine.
Tip for today is just speak loudly.
Well, especially when that band's on.
Yeah.
Speak and project.
My name is David Dean. I live in Westminster, down in Windham County. We ought to work out rides getting up here.
Yeah.
I am a speaker's appointment and represent rural interests. Westminster is a small town. I spent 30 years in the legislature, 2 in the Senate, 28 in the House, and most of the time chaired the Natural Resources, Energy, or Fish and Wildlife committees in those bodies. I spent 20 years recently as the river steward for the Connecticut River Watershed Council, now known as the Connecticut River Conservancy. Advocacy, FERC, and other permit processes for my daily bread and butter, if you will. A lot of time working with Julie in her office, both as an advocate and as a legislator. So as I like to introduce myself these days, I'm a lot of formers. My current interest is I chair the local chapter of Trout Unlimited for the Connecticut River Valley chapter. And that's what keeps me engaged with some of the public policy issues that you folks are facing.
So we'd start with Ryan.
Good morning, everyone. Ryan Patch with the Vermont Agency of Agriculture Food Markets. Here on behalf of Secretary Kendricks, I'm the policy manager with a focus on agricultural climate change and land use. Glad to be here.
Good morning. I'm Johanna Miller, lead the Energy and Climate Program with the Vermont Natural Resources Council. I'm the House appointed environmental rep and here in person.
Good morning, I'm Michelle Boomhauer, and I am here representing Secretary Joe Flynn of the Agency of Transportation. And I am the Policy Planning and Intermodal Development Director for the Agency of Transportation. And I have been with the agency for the past 8 to 9 years.
Good morning, everyone. Lauren Oates. I'm the Director of Policy and Government Relations at the Nature Conservancy in Vermont, here as the Senate appointee for expertise in natural hazards resilience or something like that.
Abby Course, I co-own the Course Farm Dairy, which is a small organic dairy down on the Massachusetts border in Windham County, and I'm the Farm and Forest Sector representative here.
There are three of us from Windham County.
Unheard of.
Good morning, I'm Kelly Klein. I am the owner and CEO of Grenfell Meadery in St. Albans, Vermont. So I'm coming from Franklin County today. And I am the representative for the small business community on the Climate Council.
Morning, everybody. Leslie Ann Dupini-Drew. I'm a faculty member in Geography and Geosciences, University of Vermont, Vermont State climatologist, and House appointee with climate change expertise.
Hello, I'm Kristen Klauser. I'm the Secretary of Administration.
Julie Morris, Secretary of Natural Resources.
Jim Tierney, Commissioner, Department of Public Service.
Good morning, I'm Erica Borneman. I'm the Director of Vermont Emergency Management, which is a division of the Department of Public Safety here on behalf of Commissioner Morrison, and I'm the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee Co-Chair.
Hi, I'm Sue Minter, and I'm the Executive Director at Capstone Community Action and a Senate appointee. It's been a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I got my shot.
Jared Duval, Executive Director of Energy Action Network, and I was appointed by the Senate as a member of a Vermont-based organization with expertise in energy and data analysis.
My name is Brandon Kleppner. I'm CEO of Danforth Pewter. I'm a House appointee to represent Vermont manufacturing. And just to beef up the Windham County presence, my mother lives in Windham. 91, she doesn't do a great deal of work anymore, but she is good at suggesting projects to my brother and me, which we understand to be orders which must be carried out.
Yeah,
a couple of years ago, she suggested that she would like a community scale solar farm built on one of her fields. We went to work on that, and in a few weeks, we should be breaking ground. Permitting's done, financing's lined up, so we're going to build a sweet little solar farm. I think our family's general worldview is that global warming threatens to damage or destroy everything you care about, and the only rational thing is for every individual and every organization at every level, from household to the UN, to do everything we can as quickly as we can to decarbonize the atmosphere.
I'm Lindsay Curley. I'm the Secretary of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development.
Chris, since you're the only one on our screen, you get to go next.
Sure. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. Good morning. My name is Chris Winters. I am on day 1, hour 3 of being the Commissioner of the Department for Children and Families. So I can't be there in person today. I wish I could be. I'm looking forward to really diving in and being a full participant in future meetings. I am a career public servant. I've worked for the Secretary of State's office for 25 years, the last 8 as Deputy Secretary, and I'm now just diving into this new role at the Agency of Human Services. I am the AHS designee to the Council. And I do need to leave in 10 minutes, so I apologize for that as well, to meet with my team for the first time here this morning.
Rich,
Rich.
next.
Yeah, good morning. This is Rich Cowart. I'm a principal with the Regulatory Assistance Project, which is a nonprofit that advises governments on clean energy policy. I'm a House appointee representing an organization with climate policy expertise. Happy to be a member of the Climate Council and apologizing for not being there today. I'm still suffering from COVID and you don't want me in the room with you today, but I'll participate as much as I can.
Maybe we can boost around Dawn remains on your side, so you can. I can. I'll see where. You may be able to hear us, but you guys are somewhat muted. And Liz is not.
She had a meeting,
So she's not.
she'll come in the room when she's here.
All right, so we'll free her when she gets here. So other quick, actually bring up the slides. We have the sure. And while she's doing that, just for there, we do have, you can see a number of folks online, mostly from the public. And we'll be asking everybody to stay muted online until you're speaking. For those of you in the room, you'll see we only have 2 mics in 2 different places. If you're chatting at your table, please mute your mic so we're not projecting that into the webinar. But otherwise, for the entire room. So best we've got, but it looks like it's working pretty well so far. Other kinds of. The other thing I did want to do, I don't think he's on here yet. Is David Plum on yet? David is. Oh, I'm Catherine Morris, by the way, I should say. And I'm with the Census Building Institute. You would normally have David Plum. He is so bummed he can't be here. He had another obligation. He is sitting in an airport in Charlotte, ready to fly to Chile, and he will try to join us remotely. Better join us remotely because he got a good presentation. So he'll be joining us remotely and send to the board. Really wish he could. So one of the things, if you can go to the next one, one of the things I heard was that you have never really formally had ground rules. I don't really like ground rules. They sometimes come across as like a kindergarten room set of rules, but I did hear that these rules were adopted, or these ways of working together, I'll call them, were adopted by the Biomass Task Force when they were doing their work, so look familiar to you. But I thought it was worth at least just sort of acknowledging among ourselves that this is what we certainly come here with the hopes of doing, which is present, have an open mind, open to others' points of view, and obviously a lot of differences that might arise. Speak your truth, but also be aware of the impact that you're having on others. So understand how to say that in a way that honors others, and listen generously across difference. And obviously, I think the first one goes to, as you would want others to speak to you, you would think about speaking to others. So if that self-care, certainly you have the right to acknowledge when it's offensive or need to respond to. But I just felt like it would be worthwhile at least putting that up there for us to think about. If there's anything else that you would like to ask the group together to embrace as a place to start today, certainly welcome that. So we, that's it. We wanted to start today with the just transition election, which has been it's been part of your meetings for at least the last year, I think. And today we wanted to ask you to think about some of the words you heard from the public in the last meeting in January, as well as the letter that came from Renew's BIPOC Advisory Council that was shared with you before this meeting. And and your own experience, really, a lot of your own experience over the last year. And think about how you have seen, or more importantly, how you would like to see just transition integrated, equity and inclusion integrated into your work in the coming year. And certainly if there are things that you feel like you want to respond directly to, in terms of either the letter I referenced or the comments you heard last meeting, very welcome. But I'm going to stop there and just really turn it over to you. See what you might want to share with each other.
So I've spent quite a bit of time reflecting on what we heard at that meeting, and one of the things I've been thinking about is part of the challenge, I believe, and I'm hopeful this is something we'll come away with from today's meeting, is clear process. I think that we've created a number of systems and committees and task groups to produce important work products, and people are clearly vested in that work, and yet don't necessarily have the same kind of clarity about how the council is going to utilize those products, what our timeline is for taking action, what kind of discussion and public engagement will occur around each one of those. And I think it leaves a lot of room for people sort of forming their own expectations, and then us not living up to them. And so being much clearer around the process for the work products, whether it's something delivered by a consultant or something delivered by a task group or subcommittee of the council, I think will be really important as we're sort of in this in-between planning phases. When we were building towards a plan, we had a lot of clarity in that specific endpoint and deadline that was established for us. Now everything's a little bit more nebulous, and I think that that's a piece, that's not certainly the totality, but a piece of some of what's challenging.
So clarity that would give, set the right types of expectations, not only for the council, but for the public as well.
Yeah, and anyone who's sort of working in service to the council, right? We've created task groups and have subcommittees, but don't necessarily have that clarity about work product and how they will be considered by the council.
And you also mentioned public engagement. That is obviously a big component of the work we have ahead, and we are going to spend a fair amount of time today talking about those public engagements and strategy. That is intended to be part of this.
I think I tried to say this at the previous meeting. I feel that there are so many issues that I think we're struggling with because the lens that we see our work in, and really the lack of true diversity in this group relative to some of the issues that emerge within the Just Transitions subcommittee, and the folks with whom, we're trying to have conversation. I agree with your point about sort of process and expectations. But I truly feel that it is part of that relates to the voices that we're listening to and trying to engage with, but then the power dynamic because of who is in this room that gets to make kind of decisions. So for myself, given that my appointment is to represent the voices of those of low income, and it makes sense in some way because I run a community action agency and anti-poverty organization, but I feel that myself and the privilege I live with and my experience in these very circles and dynamics throughout my career mean that I don't offer the diversity personally that I think this effort needs. So as we evolve over the next 6 whatever months or sooner, I am looking to engage people from within the network of community action to really hopefully transfer my
participation to someone else who can, I think, bring greater diversity. So I'm just mentioning that. I've stepped back from being the co-chair. Kelly has stepped in, at least temporarily. We had really hoped another member of this council who certainly presents and provides greater perspective and diverse perspective would be able to help lead. Other than that, I'm very excited to see about our public engagement. I think it's fundamental that we think very differently about the way we gain perspectives on our work and listen with intention and open-mindedness to other voices than the paradigm that we live in now. Unless we really change that paradigm and the focus and who's here at this table, I don't believe people with different voices will truly be represented in the way that I think is being asked of us.
Address both some of the comments in the last meeting as well as some of the comments in the letter.
I think that something too would have to be done about the manner in which we assume credibility and from whom that's coming. I represent a frontline community. I have lived in poverty in my life. I live rurally. I'm married to somebody who does a lot of the work that this council is asking the state to do. And I have very much felt that there isn't a space in this room for the voices of the people who have to do the work to truly be heard. And unfortunately, I don't think, or I don't understand how we can hope to reach the goals that we all claim we want to reach without engaging in substantive and robust ways with the people who have to carry out all of the work that we are asking to be done. And to my knowledge, there isn't an electrician in this room. We don't have a workforce right now to do the work that needs to be done. It doesn't exist. And even further, focusing solely on, for example, weatherization or clean energy pieces. Additionally, we can't build a workforce because we don't have anywhere to house them. There's all these compounding factors of what Vermont faces at the moment that is keeping us from empowering the very people that we desperately need to do all the things we want done. But we're not putting their voices or their concerns first. Or at least that has been my take or my experience.
Abby, can I ask you to say something? How you would see that as very specifically get the busted beat to be eligible for the specific thing that could be done better for us?
I'm not sure. As like Sue said, I'm not sure that we're utilizing a paradigm through which that can happen. I think that is largely the issue, is this was created up here and filtered down. And for better or worse, a lot of these communities of people from which those very voices come are used to being ignored. They're used to being skeptical of the government or of entities beyond their communities and things like that. And I don't really know. I mean, I'm not going to be able to take on another term because I can't commit to this type of a workload moving forward. And there's an organic dairy, I have to make my farm run, keep my business going. I'm not sure how you have in the room the people you most need in the room when the ask is essentially that they would have to give up working time. I know that's always the question, and I know that's always the tension, and I don't have a magical answer. But I think at the very least, what we need to try to do is ensure that if those people are able to make it work to come into this space or to serve on this council, that there is a pathway for their theory of change to be pursued within our vision. And I'm not sure that that currently exists.
And one thing that you raised, which is, you know, that aligning the capacity and the expectations of the work types of people. We should definitely.
So I think a couple of things were said here that I have been thinking about as well. And I think what Julie said about expectations, making sure people understand what processes there are. And then we're going to be talking about capacity. And that's the other thing is I think that some people, members of the public or members of subcommittees may think that all of us are here and we're, getting paid to do this. This is our part of our job. And that's true for some people, but not for other people like Abby and myself. We have businesses we're running. It's a lot of time and energy that we're devoting to this, and I care about this. That's why I'm here. But it's also not necessarily a luxury that a lot of the voices we want present can afford. Even if there were, and this was brought up in the letter that we were reading about the per diems being $50 per meeting or $6.25 per hour if you're not working in a meeting. That's obviously very, very low and not something that's a livable wage in Vermont or probably anywhere in this country. And so that obviously needs to be addressed. But even if we people we're asking to engage in this work are being compensated fairly and earning a livable amount of money for the time that they're putting in, they'd still be taking time away from a job and families and things. And I know all of us have done a lot of that, but that's the sticking point. And I think, Abby, you said it well, is that people want to engage in this work, but there also is the reality of your livelihood, and not everybody we want to hear from can afford that time away from other really important things in their lives. And it's a problem. And so I think that also comes in when we talk about engagement. People whose voices we need to hear don't need to be sitting at the table, but we need to hear them and we need to make that space for listening. And that is something we've been talking about for a long time. And I'm excited to see how we can do better at that going forward. And I'm really excited to hear about some of the extra time and energy and money put forward for public engagement, because that's just so important, and it needs to be done thoroughly and respectfully. And I hope that we can do that.
You pointed to a couple that this group doesn't have. And I'm curious if folks see as if you see part of your role as recommendations. And if others have reactions to some of it. Suggestions.
That's clearly in the charter. It calls for recommendations to the legislature.
And Catherine, someone just chatted that they were having trouble hearing you, so.
Okay.
Yeah, you might.
We may wonder if we should
Move this to the middle.
Yeah, like down in front of Michelle.
Unmuted.
It's unmuted now.
Okay,
It says
great.
it is. Sorry.
We got here and we found out that just so everybody knows, yeah,
System.
it's a state system that does not work with Zoom. So we had to change the meeting and minute to Teams. So people should have gotten updates this morning. But yeah, in your your Outlook invite, there should be a Teams, and Marion's monitoring the Zoom meeting too until
I'm just guessing nobody could hear
another
Jane.
fun aspect.
So any reactions to what you've heard already?
Just noting that Annette noted that Lily Terry has joined.
Oh, yes, I was looking for the right moment. Another council, the youth member who is joining us, and she is online, just so you know, Catherine.
From Italy?
What?
From
From
Italy?
Italy, I think.
Oh, my goodness. Great.
That is a commitment right there.
Wow.
Maybe she could introduce herself so we could meet her.
So any other, either reactions to what you've heard, any other things you want to add? David? Yeah.
A suggestion was made that maybe we have the young woman introduce herself.
Yes, yes. And I don't see her on the screen, but Lily, would you like to introduce yourself to the rest of the council here? We have a couple new members that haven't met.
Sure. Hi, I'm Lily Terry. I'm the youth member. I am currently in Spain right now, and just got out of school, so sorry I'm a little late.
Great, you can join us.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm happy to.
So again, we have a couple more minutes. I want to make the best of that time. Anybody have anything else you want to add here? Yeah.
So I think it was great to start off with the ground rules. It's something that we haven't done as a group, and it may be worth taking a little step back and seeing what we could put forward in that space that comes from all of us, because it's always nice to be heard. And so it was great to have the biomass as one piece, as a starting point. But if there are other parts of being heard that we need as a group, that might be a good activity for us to sort of take a deeper dive into.
That's great. And I think maybe we can talk, add that to the list of governance issues too. I think that'll come up as part of how you work together maybe this afternoon. So I'll make sure we note that again. Yeah. So,
I just want to acknowledge that I do think that in spite of the challenges that we're hearing about and feeling, I want to acknowledge that, the team has worked incredibly hard, and we all have worked hard to try to do something a little different and be, quote, more engaging I certainly know that our subcommittee worked incredibly hard to evolve the guiding principles and to certainly involve voices that are far more diverse. But, this structure of having subcommittees that we're learning from and gaining from, but not empowering is part of this. But I really want to just lift up that this is not unique to us. And it's really hard. I feel personally like I'm failing because of this. This has been the thing I'm supposed to be helping change a dynamic around. And I keep going, but we are trying, and we have to continue to evolve. And I think we are making incremental steps in terms of, because to your point, we are an entity of a legislature that is way up here, Abby. And that's part of what a really real challenge, especially when we're talking about such dramatic changes throughout our economy that of course our changing climate is directing us to try to address. But I just want to acknowledge this is really hard. It's really hard personally. I'm trying to be doing things differently, thinking differently, and yet I know how limited that can be because of the life I've led to this moment in this place. And but I want to thank everyone for trying, and I want to encourage us all to continue to think differently and evolve and listen. The most important thing. And I hope that our new engagement strategy, which I think is trying to embody a different approach, will really be an important learning. And the other thing is speed. That the speed of trust. We live in a world that's moving so fast, and we're trying to slow down. And I think this is part of that tension. So I just wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Sue. you know, this is going to be just the start of this conversation in the sense that, you know, we are going to be talking more about capacity and what that means, about roles, how you might, for instance, think about bringing more diversity into the subcommittees, that, you know, and how that could work. How do you actually approach public engagement? I spent a lot of time talking about that. And is it enough? Is it the right strategy? So I think all of those elements are things that we need to come back to throughout the day. But we wanted to start with this because we wanted everybody to have this front of mind as we're taking on these other topics. How are we going to continue to integrate as fully as possible the just transition principles? How are we going to be thinking about public engagement in a way that is as inclusive and as effective in actually hearing those voices? And obviously, how are we going to make sure that the decisions that are being made sort of filter up from there? So just, I guess, any other closing comments before we turn to some of the other major questions that we have on the agenda today? Yes, Jane.
And let Sue's remarks go by her, for not assuring her that she's not failing. Nobody in this room. This room is not failing. It's never been done before. Nobody said it was going to be perfect the first time out. Kudos to you, I suppose, for evincing a recognition that we haven't succeeded in every way we want to. When you allow your morale to dip that low, threaten to enter the territory of paralysis. So, thing to do when you feel like you're losing is just, take a deep breath, get back in there, and try again. There are so many assumptions being made about how this can work as opposed to the reality of what can work that I don't have time to rewrite them. But I have some faith. And I do have faith that the direction that we've charted pursuant to a mandate that not everybody agrees with, including me, that we will do our very best with them. It's not a matter of choice, this is a matter of duty. As long as nobody is withholding their best, I really don't think you can ask more of yourself.
I just heard the fan come on, so please speak up. Yes, Kelly.
One thing that I have been thinking about a lot, and I appreciate you saying that about potentially falling into paralysis. I'm thinking about this, if this is maybe something to put into ground rules, but bringing a learning mindset, and that involves thinking how we can be better going forward and not just self-recrimination. We're always learning, we're always improving. Let's bring that to the work we're doing and keep continuing to be better every day.
Good way to move into the next session, which is I sort of want to start with an overview of what we are going to try to tackle. We've given you a handout that talks about 4 core questions that we're asking you to grapple with. What is the capacity? And actually, there's a slide on this. Okay. So before we actually talk about the specifics in the slides, though, I just want to make sure it's capacity, tasks, roles, and governance. And we provided this handout because we wanted to have kind of just a jump start to the conversation. So you'll see that the staff and David Plum actually worked on a set of hypotheses based on really what their general experience has been and what they've heard from you as well. So it's not coming out of the blue, and it's not meant to get agreement around the hypothesis. It's really just a way to jumpstart the conversation about each of these topics. The first one being capacity. So what is the capacity of the council subcommittee members, state agency staff to do this work? Is the work that you're going to be talking about in terms of tasks, specific tasks, is it in line and realistic with what your capacity is and the capacity you'd like to, again, not the capacity that you had or had to give, but what you like that to look like going forward. So the hypothesis is that you can't keep doing what you've been doing. It's been too much. And we've already heard that. So it can't be replicated. The degree of effort, which was absolutely needed, can't be replicated indefinitely. And the state staff roles and the level of support are shifting. That's not going to be the same either. And most importantly, we all need to be realistic and clear-eyed about what, the expectations of yourself, of others, and of, the people that other people you'd like to bring into the room, which is what we've heard. Let's move to the next slide. Tasks is really about the work itself. So we're in a different phase, and the next phase is really about revisions to the initial climate action plan. So what tasks are needed for the council to do a successful update process overall? And what other tasks beyond just the update to the council are needed? For instance, the addendums. We've talked about addendums that are sort of these intermediary products that are more urgent that need to be done first. The one that we've talked about the most recently has been the biomass task force recommendations. So the hypothesis here is the best and highest use of the council's time is to finalize the biomass and transportation addendums and focus on the revision, but not a wholesale rewrite of the initial plan. So that means you're going to have to be thinking about what to prioritize, what in terms of revisions, and what maybe is okay as it is. And then this last bit is about the public engagement process, that if we do better planning and thinking ahead, that there's an opportunity to really use the public engagement process to support your work and to bring in more voices and to help implement the just transition principles. Roles. So up until now, we've had the councils, the decision-making body, the steering committee, subcommittees, and then we created these task groups, and they're all supported by the state staff. So thinking about all of those, what is going to be their roles going forward? As part of the hypothesis, there's, the task groups were set up to do cross-cutting work, and they were really outside of the public process. They required a huge amount of effort support on part of the staff, and a huge amount of effort on part of the task groups themselves. So the hypothesis here is that that's not been very workable either, and maybe needs to change. Subcommittees. The role of subcommittees would be to really do the work that some of these task groups have been doing to channel recommendations up to the council. And then the council would have to do more of the cross-cutting deliberations on issues. And then finally, on governance, we had a process roadmap that was done back in 2021, I think. There's lots of stuff that has changed. You've learned from your experience. So the question is, what in that process roadmap needs to be updated to be more in line with what you're going to be doing over the next year or 2 years? Based on what we've learned, there are gaps that need clarification. There are changing roles, changing tasks, and there are obviously some parts of that roadmap that need to be updated. And an issue that came up in the steering committee that's added here, I don't think was on the hypothesis, but another thing that I wanted to highlight was that the council needs and has talked about clarifying the process for voting, for making decisions around multiple versions of documents, for making sure it's understood what it is what issues can be brought forward for the council's consideration. So that was the other piece that I just wanted to highlight because it was brought up by the steering committee. Actually by, I think, public comment too. So those are the 4 things that we're going to take on. And I want, before we actually get into each of them specifically, to ask you if there's anything else. What else do you want to talk about that would help your work be successful the next 2 years? Is there something else that we missed here? At the back of your worksheet, you can always use that. Yes.
I guess I would just add that I think the structure we have operated under has been planning focused and coming up with a direction and activities, tasks to undertake, et cetera. But the full cycle of plan, implement, evaluate, adjust, plan, there's a cycle that is naturally part of how you would advance an effort. And I don't know that the council framework that we have moved from planning and task identification to understanding now the work needs to get done. We need to have set criteria for what the work, is sort of directing towards in terms of how we're going to evaluate whether we were successful in what we planned for, what we implemented, and then how do we need to adjust for the next planning cycle. And so I think my team is in particular, and others may feel this as well, kind of feels under this pressure for not having done enough yet because we're in the process of implementing what we had planned to do. And until we get the outcomes, it's like we can either do this or that, but we don't do both things well because we need the outcomes in order to inform the next steps. And so those are pressures that I feel for my group.
So it's sort of monitoring and measuring how well the implementation is going.
Yeah.
To inform what you need to do differently.
Yeah.
Yeah. Leslie, you add to that or say something different?
No, do not say something different if you wanted to finish your thought.
Well, I just think, implementation, you could think of that as part, or the measuring monitoring as part of one of the tasks.
Yeah.
But I appreciate you putting kind of a fine point on that that's a very important task before you even get to some of the revisions. And it may be incomplete, right? You're not going to have all the information you need.
Yeah.
And
What I was going to say is all of us here, both around the table and on the squares up there, are really, really close to the plan itself. And we have to remember that folks are not as close to it, and it can come across as being very, very dense. And so I think part of our moving forward, the next piece is to unpack that so that everybody who has not been part of the 2-year process could actually come into this space and understand a little bit more. What are the goals and what are we trying to do and where do people sit? Where do people fit? And I think that would help with part of the implementation because it's really easy for us because we've been in that funnel, if you will, that we don't always remember and recognize that everybody else hasn't been with us. So part of not just the public engagement, but part of the actual stepping forward is that unpacking. And coming back to Sue's point about moving at the speed of trust, that's how you build trust. That's how because we need to talk, right? We need to talk, we need to get out there, we need to actually explain. And so that's the piece I think it sort of cuts across all of these others, but doesn't fit necessarily into one versus the other.
ask you, so is it sort of, I was going to put that in terms of an actual other issue or topic for us to cover. Is it about how you are communicating the work that you've already done, which you're saying is really important, and how that gets communicated not only among the council members, but to the public?
So I think I'm going to put my education hat on for a second. I think it's not a 2-pager, right? We don't have a little flyer thingy with, like cheat sheet, bullet point notes. And I think if somebody were to ask you to do your elevator speech, what's in the plan? We don't have that, right? Because there's so much in so many moving places. And to the extent that we could actually condense it for whatever the purpose is, I don't think we've gotten to that point yet. And so it becomes intimidating, it becomes overwhelming because it's not 10 pages, it's not 100 pages. How long is the plan?
Over 300, right?
Right, it's in the hundreds of pages, right? And so nobody's gonna pick it up and read it cover to cover unless they had a specific point that they were looking for. So it behooves us to actually unpack it so that everybody can sort of understand what we try to do.
And that seems like it's really important in terms of the implementation process, right? So, I mean, how you communicate what you were trying to accomplish in the plan. So I don't know, communication and implementation, I'm trying to find kind of a rubric for us to all think about this and maybe add it to your worksheet so that we can make sure that we talk about it in more depth. Yeah, David and then Julie, or did you want to add on to that?
Yeah, it sort of builds off Leslie Ann, but if you have something related to that.
Well, this is my first meeting, and I've read a lot of the documents that have been produced. And the word implement, I'm not sure people sitting at this table know what it means. I certainly don't, but I don't think it's because of my newness. Electricians, we have a whole world of organized labor out there, an apprentice program, and so obviously no one sitting at this table is going to go wire some energy saving device. So what does it mean to implement when you get past putting words on paper? You guys are decision makers, I'm looking over here at the power squadron. In terms of, well, no, but I mean, your energy policy into the future, your environment into the future. But that would be an interesting conversation to have. What does it mean for them to implement what this group comes up with? So I'm just, what's implement? I think that might be an interesting first task.
To tie into that, that might be a way into the conversations that we are then wanting to have happen, right? If we've identified, I was thinking about the fact that I don't even know, I've read the climate action plan, but I haven't metabolized it, right? And as we've been working through legislative sessions and seeing legislators work through the policy of those things, I feel like that's where I'm starting to understand the gaps that I see based on my lived experience, right? So maybe now is the point where you bucket it out into implementers. So, and then you're able to go into more targeted, sort of like we did for ag and ecosystems outreach. We had the farmer specific night where, we had 80 people who were working on farms come and we talked to them, and then we took that information in and tried to think about, so, who are those other groups? And then how do we get to a public forum for electricians or a public forum for contractors or, and those things. And then you can start to build, from the policy up here, forming the implementers and weaving that perspective into how you're going to roll out the policy application.
The only modification I would put on to that is that take advantage of existing networks. AFL-CIO, you get all of your licensed trades at one time. Let's sit down and talk with them.
Yeah, I think it dovetails nicely with all of that, which is thinking about the timing of public engagement. Previously, when we took on public engagement, we did it after the plan had been drafted, but I wonder about the opportunities before we start any revisions to talk to the public again about what's in there, what progress is being made, to Michelle's point, what things are sort of in flight, even if we might not have answers or results or outcomes yet to speak to. and what that means attention should be spent on. But it does come back to prioritization, and just want to sort of call out the elephant in the room, which is this council has not prioritized our work. We have 230, whatever, 300 pages to Leslie Ann's point of action items. And I think it is very hard to think about how you can have a succinct conversation with the public absent having articulated some priorities.
So in terms of kind of what I'm hearing that we definitely need to cover that maybe isn't specifically captured under each of these 4 categories, it's sort of how we think about communicating to the public what's in the plan that you already have, and particularly identifying who out there you need to be communicating with that are going to be implementers at many, many different levels. Obviously, the state government is one of those big implementers, but there's going to be other levels, layers of that. And that would help you figure out who you need to be communicating with and how you need to communicate and what you need to communicate. So I guess I'll just sort of ask if you want to put on the back of your worksheets, like a 5th category that is, how do we communicate sort of what we already have done, the work we've already done, and in service of, facilitating implementation, I guess. Junior,
I furrowed brows.
Furrowed brow.
I'm going to keep a separate category all by myself.
Okay.
Called glaring assumptions.
Glaring assumptions.
One of them is I was noticing in your speech that you engage between saying communicating to the public and with the public. Where is the public communicating with us? That goes to what Sue was saying.
Having conversation.
As I mulled that over more, believe it or not, this was the dinner conversation in my house yesterday, because we are a bunch of nerds in my family. And that was the question about what the future of representational democracy is, when the critique of this moment is that it is not representing the people. And we are desperate to find a way to bring those voices in so that they feel their government is responsive to them. And I will again voice my critique that we have not successfully reached the people with this plan. And I also think the second glaring assumption that we have is that the plan's complete. It's not. It's got 2 major components in it that continue to need work. And it's not a coincidence that those 2 incomplete pieces have not resolved. They are, in a sense, the proxies for bigger discussions. One of them is what we're doing with the transportation sector, and the other is the biomass piece. And so we can keep writing it down as tasks or, capacity issues or whatever, but they're not. They're the fulcrum of the debate about what is it we're trying to achieve with this plan. How can we achieve it? Who does it? And in the end, do we have the capacity for it? And 2 years into it, I don't have answers. What I do have is 2 years of construction in that direction. And the policy nerd, I can be happy with that. I think that's monumental progress, but it's not where we need to be after the trust. And it continues to defy realism, which brings me to my 3rd glaring assumption. And forgive me, David, I am beyond thrilled to have you here because you are a former legislator. But when I say these things about your colleagues, please don't take offense.
I'm going to rat you out instantly.
I've done that for you.
I know.
Together, and I'm still here. The 3rd glaring assumption is law is at the foundation of it.
I just want to add on to David's conversation about implementation, which maybe I started. I don't know that this body understands all of the implementation that is actually occurring. The $20 million in electric vehicle incentives, Replace Your Ride program, the EVSE deployment, the dealership engagement, the Clean Cars 2, all of these things that are activities with lots of money behind them that the legislature has put forth to support that we are on the ground implementing right now. And so like maybe like something within our communication, like development, as Julie said, that sort of needs to take into account and fiscally and on a timeline basis and on a capacity basis, identify those implementation activities that are supporting the plan objectives. And the other thing is, what is the responsibility of this body relative to other bodies that are doing this work? The local town climate committees, the ecumenical climate efforts that are going on. There's just sort of a whole broad range of activities, and this group can't do all of them. And so what is the best and most important function of this group relative to understanding that other groups are working in this space at the same time? And how do we leverage our place and the place of others and, you know, help to make this a platform that is more sustainable?
In fact, that we'll talk exactly about those types of networks that we can take, you can take advantage of in our public engagement conversation. Yes, Rand, and I just want to be sure that we're attending to everybody online. Need to say, because Rich. Anyway, please do put into the chat. I don't know if we made it clear, but put into the chat anything you would like to do. We'll call.
I have sort of a mechanical question, which is the GWSA had a date by which the plan needed to be done and calls for a revised plan to be submitted every 4 years, I think. Do we have an official way to amend the plan in between? You know, we talk about biomass and transportation addenda. Do they, if we adopt an addendum, does it become an official part of the plan? Does anyone know?
Jane, you're nodding your head. I'm assuming
The transportation addendum that you all adopted is posted online as an appendix to the original initial climate plan referenced. And one of the things we were going to talk about at the December meeting that never happened was sort of a process for communicating updates to the plan and how to track that. We were actually going to reference the state hazard mitigation plan and how that plan references updates and keeps a running list of corrections, addendums, appendices, and we're going, sorry, Marion's like, that's not the plan we were going to reference, but we had one one state plan we were going to look at, and that is work that's still, but yes, the transportation addendum is officially online and listed as a component of initial.
everybody online, your Jane? The answer was yes. So yes.
Well, I just wanted to say, I very much appreciate just the thoughtful comments and the good input and insights. And I wrote down what's our niche and what's our role, because we only have so much capacity. So to your point, totally agree. And these are major interconnected complex issues. And so I'm just trying to think of surgically, what can we be doing? I look at this as an iterative plan that, you know, for the next update and then also for the next 20, 30 years, like, are we gonna, but it's a good plan to build from. And I think about things like to Abby's point about needing to hear from folks. I think about the municipal energy resilience program that's getting stood up, and there's each community can avail themselves of $4,000 to think about how do we make our communities more resilient in a warming world. That feels like an important moment, like engagement opportunity that I just want to think about when we talk about public engagement, like, because this is massive and we only have so much capacity. What is our niche in connecting with the legislature and other partners? And that is one thing that we did, I think, in the former Climate Council. We did identify who are the other partners who are actually doing this work, or who we need to be listening to and supporting in doing the work, who are not us. So
think about that specifically when you start talking about roles, you know,
right.
So putting boundaries around your role, but also thinking about how you can you know, leverage the roles of other groups that are out there.
Without telling them what to do.
Yeah, a couple more. Go ahead. So we're going to get into the details. So I'm just, at this point, if there's other things that you want to just be sure that everybody's thinking about when they go into their groups, that would be helpful.
Yeah, if you're okay. Go ahead. Yeah. I missed the very beginning of this conversation, but assuming that we're allowed to talk kind of before we jump into these things, maybe a hypothesis is used or an assumption that we should test, is that I don't think this group is necessarily grounded in the same place of what our role as a council is and what's actually in the plan. From my perspective and understanding GWSA and having done this for nearly 3 years with many of you, is that our job is to come up with the collective best recommendations for decision makers then to implement. What goes in the plan isn't something that, we voted on it. We came to consensus or we didn't. There was a majority vote action, and that therefore is going to happen. I think that we need to understand that we're just coming up with our best ideas. I totally agree with Secretary Moore that the prioritization just didn't happen, and I would love for one of our next tasks to be like a robust and consistent prioritization process for the next iteration of the plan. But at the end of the day, we are a non-decision-making authority body. We're making recommendations to those powers that be here at the State House and beyond. And sometimes often, from my perspective, we fall into a real paralysis around making decisions on what actually makes it into or not into the plan. But it's just recommendations. And so I would, in the next iteration of the plan and our continued work together, I would ask that we ground ourselves in that so that we're not paralyzed by each small or large action recommendation that goes into the plan.
Well, I'm not sure that's true that we just make recommendations.
Okay.
In
See,
fact,
I'm making I want to test this hypothesis.
the legislation did make our plan legally binding with the consequence that if it is not enacted, Vermont citizens have the right to sue to compel enactment. So I think we're doing a little more than making recommendations, and Jared has the legislation.
Well, I'd argue the legislation says we're tied to the actual reduction requirements, and the plan is, here is our best idea of how to do that. It's not the plan. Like, there's a small action from our subcommittee that's like, VTrans will consider reduction in mowing along sides of roads. Like, I'm sure Michelle isn't picking that up and saying, well, staff, we have to do that because it's in the climate action plan. We do have to, as a state, reduce our collective emissions pursuant to those requirements. But our plan just says, like, we think this is the best way to get there. There are probably other ways. There are definitely other ways. But the plan itself, from my read, is not legally binding.
I mean, I would defer to others who have more legal expertise than I do, but I'll just say my starting assumption is that there's a mix of in the Global Warming Solutions Act of components of what the climate action plan can and should do. So my understanding is that when we are recommending a new policy for the legislature to adopt, then the ball is then in the legislature's court to pass a law or not, and then the governor will decide, what to do after that happens. I think that there is a set of work that is much more directly in the decision-making space, which is recommending rules. I mean, I'm looking at page 17 of the Global Warming Solutions Act. The first thing under rules says the Secretary of Natural Resources shall adopt rules pursuant to VSA Chapter 25, consistent with the Vermont Climate Action Plan. And so my sense is that, when we include it as a council in the Climate Action Plan, the recommendation to go through rulemaking for Advanced Clean Cars 2 and Advanced Clean Cars trucks, that did then become a requirement to take regulatory and rulemaking action. So I think that there's different different paths that the council can recommend, some of which are more binding in the regulatory and rulemaking space, and some of which are more recommendations when it goes to the legislature or a new program that would happen kind of voluntarily in a more grassroots basis. But that's just my read.
Thank you for bringing that up. Lauren, and thanks for the clarification. don't
Yeah,
think
and
there's anything more, but
I want to endorse that because you mentioned the APA, the Administrative Procedures Act. Under it, the secretary can introduce a rule that is under, modify the suggestion and introduce a rule, reject introducing a rule. Those are the powers and authority that exist within the executive branch. So we're an advisory body. I just, and having spent time in the legislature, a group such as this, even with the depth of understanding and the importance of the role of the people sitting here, you've got political reality. And that trumps all in terms of the legislative process. So at that point, if a citizen wants to sue, they're going to sue the secretary, they're going to sue the legislature en masse or individually. I mean, so I wouldn't go too far towards the decision maker role as much as let's make really good recommendations that are implementable by people with resources.
Consistently prioritize.
Well, yeah, after we prioritize, I'll go with that. 300 pages. Ooh.
I'll just, this conversation has illuminated exactly what I'm saying, which is something that we grappled with while we were in the process of writing a plan. So this existential conflict of what are we here to do and what's the boundaries of our, something that we did not have consensus on, still don't have consensus on. We all have different opinions. And so I think it will be important for us as we are looking at the future and what we expect the council to do in the future in the next generation to be really clear about, this is under roles, about the role in determining an individual role.
I just want to make sure, in case Rich wanted to add something.
Oh, sorry, I just put it in the chat. But my 2 cents are as follows. There's been a lot of really good points made. And I'm feeling sorry that I'm not there in the room with you. In particular, I agree with the point that we need to, the phrase was used, unpack the plan just so that regular citizens can understand what's in it, and that may have to be done in sections, so that we can listen to people after they have a better appreciation of what's in the plan. Second, I really agree with the point made by Abby, and I think echoed by Sue, that we need to hear from implementers, that and that's going to require some engagement strategy so that parts of the plan that that we know aren't going to be real on the ground in the world unless people with the expertise to implement things can make it better or advise how it should be different. And then third, I think there's a strong point made that it's really useful for us to document, for the council to document what's already going on, and to sort of celebrate some progress that's being made. And so it helps us to then, as a council, understand what still needs to be done, but acknowledging the fact that there are a lot of actions being undertaken, or have been undertaken, some of them for years, that we should put in the positive progress column, instead of thinking that everything that remains to be done hasn't even been started, because a lot of it has been started. Thanks, folks.
thank you, Rich. That's a perfect summary to where we are right now. So I appreciate you taking my role on it. And one more comment, and then I really want us to get to the work.
Brief and
ties in with a lot of what was just said. I'd love to, after we do this, have us think about how we can communicate this to people, to our partners, to the public, set clear expectations. When we say, this is our capacity, this is our role, how do we communicate that to people so people don't go, hey, how come you didn't enact a law? And well, that's not our role, that's the legislature. How do we communicate that out and make sure everyone's clear? Once we're clear, get it out there.
So I want everybody to, you've got a worksheet that has these 4 categories that you might have added to it. I want you to think, sort of, maybe if this is helpful to start out very high level. What is a success? What are the elements of success at the end of the next 2 years? What would you think needs to be in place to make the next 2 years successful beyond these deep dives we're going to do here? So if that helps you kind of get centered, you can take some time to do that. And then I'd like you just to use both the worksheet and the one pager that we put together with the hypothesis to think about these 4 questions. And then we're going to share all of your thinking in the room together. But I thought it would be very helpful if you just spend some time thinking on your own first. I'm going to give you 5 minutes, do a check-in, see where you are, and then we'll come back and give you more time if you need.
I just wanted to make sure for our members who are online that they know exactly which documents you are referring to.
Yeah,
putting them in the chat first.
Yeah, links to them. Good. All right, thanks. Start the clock. I think I should tell everybody the bathrooms were out this door. That's this door, and find it to your left. Your spending machines out there. Anybody needs more time? Great. How are you doing? Few more minutes, decide. That's down. Let's, actually, let's talk, Rich, but since you haven't had a chance to weigh in first. If you have something you want to say, or start us off with, that would be great. What I'm gonna try to my best ability to try to capture some of the points that you're making up here on these charts, and recognize that, you know, these are all interrelated issues. So if you need to jump around, that's okay. But I thought maybe we would start with capacity, since that's been something that may set some boundaries for some other issues that you're going to talk about. But if we need to go back and forth between that and tasks and roles, that's fine too. Rich, are you in a place where you would want to jump in, get us started? Oh, and Lily, I'm sorry, Lily. There you are.
I think you should start in the room, but I'm happy to add my 2 cents. Better to listen.
All right, Lily, did you have anything you wanted to add before we start in the room?
No, I think it's better to start in the room. I also can't open the document, so if I have anything to add, I will add that after I hear what other people have to say.
Great, thank you. She's tossing it back to you. So.
Good job, Louie.
It's pretty long. We had slides on it. So anybody want to jump in? I know.
I feel like the preceding conversation was incredibly helpful, and it's taken me to a particular place of thinking about this effort we're in. It is no question that the climate action plan that we put forward is a monumental effort. And each of us in our respective areas gave a tremendous amount of energy, time, and thought, and I think put together an impressive document. And I guess I'm really thinking about our newest member's point about advisory, that ultimately I think we did the first step. And now I think we should try to take our foot off the pedal and slow down and listen and be more advisory. Listen to the folks who feel unheard. Listen to the implementers, the farmers, the electricians, the fuel dealers, and learn and take it in and invite the public to learn and be that kind of a body, because the decision makers in the legislature are very busy, and they're going to they're busy, I think, taking forward our recommendations in that environment, which is quite different from ours. That's going to lead to action and response from the executive branch. What can we do? We can really be much more pervasive listeners. Maybe we are in our respective areas, again, the farmers or the I don't know, that idea of slowing down now and listening more, and that's the engagement, bringing, especially the folks who are feeling in the municipality, the pressure of these deadlines that are very ambitious. What do they mean? So that our legislators a year from now can hear more about what we've learned. That's where I'm at in thinking about our big picture role. Because I think capacity, we're so burnt out. Below, the world is burnt out. We have gone through COVID and it isn't over. And I know I couldn't, or my successor couldn't probably give more than 2 to 4 hours a month. But I'd rather it be not pretending we know what's going on and we have more to say and do, but to actually take in and digest. I think the people who should be doing are the incredible, capable staff. We now have a climate action office. That's an incredible accomplishment. We weren't even close to doing that before we started our business. And really good qualified staff. And I think we have consultants who are now thinking about engagement. We'll hear about that. So that's me. I'll stop. Thank you.
Great start. Thank you very much. Yeah, very. So as I've been thinking about the next iteration of the plan, it occurs to me that our paradigm for the initial plan in all of its development is not the paradigm, or maybe it is, but I don't think it is, the paradigm that will be taken forward into the future. So we should be thinking about all of those pieces of the process that happened and thinking about them in a very, for example, unfortunately, a work plan and an outline of the plan to be kind of developed as we went along. Specifically outlines deliverables. The council has an opportunity to be very specific about what they want from subcommittees. Say, complete revision of the plan, or is this just an update? Those are all questions that have to be able to take us into. That's a high level statement. I would just say that from a capacity perspective, and preface the conversation around the paradigm of what we do in the future, just to say that from the, I think broadly, none of us can do what we did originally the next time. We did it because we had a statutory obligation and it was the right thing to do. I can speak personally that it really took away from the mission of VEM to have my time so devoted to it, but it was the right thing to do because it also supports the mission of VEM. And I think many of us could say the same thing, that we really had to devote resources that we didn't already have to this because it was the right thing to do in addition to the legislative mandate. But we, again, need to rethink about what we're going to look for from council members, from subcommittee members in support of the next iteration of the plan, and be thoughtful and deliberative about that. I think we had fantastic support from A&R and Jane and Marion and so many other superheroes that brought us to the forefront with the plan, and we may need to clarify what the role of the office is. I don't know if that's clear, because that also determines what is needed from the council. That may not be clear yet, but I just think we're going to have answers to that question as well. And then I would also say under the task category, thinking from a subcommittee level, I think we really need to keep what is being asked of the subcommittee specific to the plan itself and not programs or developing programs. Part of the GWSA included the Municipal Vulnerability Index and the Climate Toolkit, which were both great pieces and were necessary, but for the next iteration, we can't have a subcommittee being responsible for the development of a program or for steering the development of a program. Subcommittees should be providing input on the plan. And that's it.
All my notes. I'm sure if I got everything because I was writing, but I didn't. At all. So I hear that, oh, I'm sorry, Jared.
Oh, if you want to, I was just going to add some on this capacity theme. I want to kind of continue on the thread that Sue started around kind of appreciation of where we are and where we've come from. I think that one of the things, and just in terms of like taking stock, that's really important is that we were like building the plane as we were trying to learn to fly it in that, especially that first year.
And convert it to biofuel.
Right.
And on Zoom.
Right, and on Zoom. Yeah,
In the middle of
a pandemic. And I do think that there are a number of foundational pieces that did not exist when we started that now exist and can be incredibly helpful to build on. We did not have a LEAP model or pathways analysis in terms of assessing kind of, our trajectories and emissions reduction pathways that can be revised and updated. We didn't have a process roadmap. I mean, a lot of these fundamental questions around carbon budgets, life cycle analysis, other kind of core pieces that other subcommittee, I'm speaking more from the committees that I was involved with, but I do think that we have a strong foundation. A lot of those will need to be revised and updated as kind of assumptions and inputs change and with better data. But so one of the things that I noticed is on this hypothesis statement about, it says the extraordinary level of effort invested by all parties to complete the initial climate action plan can't be replicated. That may be true, but I also think it won't need to be replicated because so much of the work that we did the first time, we're not going to be starting from scratch like we were before. And I think that that's really important to kind of acknowledge and appreciate. The other thing that I want to just kind of offer a note of caution around is the framing of this question around capacity. It says, what capacity exists among counselors, committee members, staff, and are the tasks realistic given this capacity? So it's kind of setting up what is our capacity as it is now and developing tasks working backwards from that. I think that we also want to complement that with what are the tasks that we're legally required to conduct and achieve, and if we don't have that capacity, how do we address those capacity constraints? And I think we've actually done a really good job of that as a council where, there is capacity constraints within the council or within state government. We have identified tasks for consultants and contractors. So I just want to note that I think we want to look in both directions, not just how do we minimize tasks, but because we want to make sure that we're meeting our legal responsibilities and coming out with very high quality products, how do we address capacity constraints to be able to meet to meet some of those tasks that we have?
Not just thinking about the council, about other ways, maybe.
Yeah, our work as a whole.
You said prioritize.
A lot of people.
Can you say prioritize aspects of payment provisions? I think a lot of stuff that probably needs to be prioritized. Say a little more.
Sure. I mean, I regularly think about sort of the parallels that exist between the work we're engaged in here and the work the agency and the Clean Water Board is engaged in around implementation of TMDLs and Vermont's Clean Water Act. And I think sort of the challenge is dovetails with what Jared just said, that there isn't really a budget for this work, either in terms of implementation or frankly in terms of time. And that's challenging. I appreciate Sue sort of putting 2 to 4 hours per month on the table as something that's a realistic, potentially a realistic assumption for a lot of council members. And I think we have to take that does have to factor into it. There may be solutions we can look for to bring additional capacity to bear, but I think absent that, it becomes, it's a really unwieldy and almost sort of amoeba-like conversation. The work of the Clean Water Board, for example, is very much guided by the fact that the board has a budget that's generated each year by the tax department, and its job is to think about what are the most impactful investments that can be made. I know that between June Shop and the PUC, there's a similar effort that's undertaken around Efficiency Vermont's work, I think, on a 3-year cycle. Again, here's some sense for the magnitude of the resources available. How do we direct those in a way that's most impactful? We don't have those sideboards for our work right now. The only sideboard is the greenhouse gas emissions reduction requirements. And as a result, I think it makes those conversations very challenging. So somehow we may have to self-impose some components of budget and time on our work in order to facilitate the type of conversation and the narrowing that's going to have to occur for us to be effective as a body.
You've given us 2 key criteria. Your individual times, the time of subcommittees, the staff, the budget for school. Yes.
I want to follow up right away on the notion of limiting activities because of the resources available. I would, and it just doesn't go quite to prioritization, but I want to expand. I want to say that this body should be an organizing body as well as a static and planning body. And by organizing, I mean to mobilize the networks and the resources that are out there. And I think it goes to the communication piece to and from. In terms of here are the most doable things within the realm of the people who know what they're doing in that realm, tell us. And that ends up prioritized within the plan. They can get to it. They can do it. They have the capacity. They have the knowledge. And so then if they need a little bit more, maybe that's the recommendation to the legislature to put some additional resources into that particular activity. So before we shrink, I want to think about mobilizing other resources than the people sitting behind us here, and whatever is in the budget, the governor's budget, or whatever the appropriations committees come up with. Because there are other ways, there are other resources out there. There are people.
Just to dovetail off David's comments and go back to prioritization, that all has to be looked at within the lens of the biggest bang for your buck for GHG emission reductions, and what time horizon are we looking at? Because there are, 1,000 things we could be doing in terms of the networks out there and training people to do this or that, or replacing light bulbs, going back to the roots of all of this, and what is the sort of biggest bang for the buck, like we have to do with the water quality efforts on the TMDL for this group. Because there are, and we've struggled with this throughout this process, there are immense co-benefits to the climate work that we all want to be able to take advantage of through this process. But we need to continue to remember that those will be co-benefits and ancillary improvement activities that occur, but that our prime objective is the GHG reduction and getting the most that we can through, these top 20 priorities or whatever the number is.
Or I just have to put on the table the
this is where I don't know how you move forward productively, because if you're thinking of everything sheerly through the lens of the reduction of, and particularly carbon emissions, and I know that that's by which we are legally bound. I honestly think that that is a large part of the problem in terms of the implementation on the ground and the public buy-in. And I'm not sure how to address that tension. The other thing I want to say is, yes, we have to think about where you get the biggest bang for your buck. What I want to say is you're never going to, on paper, get the biggest bang for your buck out of investing in people, but I do believe that that is partially what we have to begin doing. The people, their well-being, their ability to do the work well, none of this will happen if they cannot do the work. So we have this aversion to talking about budgeting for people and how to capacitate people to do the work, but that is a necessary component of any implementation strategy. It's how are you going to ensure that the people can do what you're asking them to do?
Just add that gas reductions are the only ones with sort of numerical goals. The law does give us 5 criteria by which to judge, and greenhouse gas emissions is just one of those, along with technical feasibility and cost effectiveness and co-benefits and the justice of the transition that we are recommending.
That actually leads me to the other thing. We're not only beholden to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we have to focus on resilience and adaptation. And so that's tough because there's no number given to it. There's no rule about how much more resilient we have to be. Those are really important and can't be overlooked. And I think a lot of times we want to just check the box. Oh, we got this many greenhouse gas points. Yay. But those are really, really important. And I think bringing those more front and center in some of our conversations going forward would move up. And the other thing I was going to say is when we're talking about capacity and maybe getting more creative about who we can rely on and what partners we can have, there are organizations around the state that would probably like to help with some of this implementation and some of the work for free because they already have their own funding and it's not state funding. I think if we can get creative and bring more partners, there are people who are just like champing at the bit to get out there and do stuff. And if we can coordinate our efforts, we'll get a lot more done.
Can I just piggyback on that? I agree. I think we have such a focus on emissions and we have numbers and we have things that are pushing us to that. But again, as the person who's working to oversee that we have vibrant communities, and after the pandemic and I saw businesses shut down, and we were so fortunate to have a lot of money to help our businesses stay afloat. We may not have that next time. And so if we have another disaster, again, businesses are going to throw the keys on the table of their lenders because they're going to be so overwhelmed. So we have to keep businesses open, schools open. We have to keep water supplies going. So if there's a way we can figure out how to amplify our resiliency, I'm all for it. I don't know how we do it. But again, I just wanted to sort of say, thank you for bringing that up. And if there's a way we can, in our revision, kind of bring that up. I know we're talking a lot about emissions, and there's a reason for that, but just want to put my plug in.
I'd add to that a bit more that though there aren't clear metrics in GWSA for the adaptation and resilience piece, we do have a lot of facts and figures that Erica and I especially could go on ad nauseum about the cost of avoided damages, the cost of current damages, and what the impact of climate change is already having on the ground. And so if we're talking, as we often have to, unfortunately, sometimes in a dollars and cents kind of paradigm, we can't ignore the adaptation and resilience piece because it is so costly. It takes away from our opportunity to use those funds to do things like climate emissions reductions. And so if that's what speaks to the largest number of people, and often it does, especially since most of our funding for this comes from taxpayers, both federal and state. We need to coalesce around like how much is it actually costing us to not do adaptation and resilience work, because it's extraordinary.
There's a great example just recently. If folks remember the Christmas power outage event, and Vermont Electric Co-op had done significant mitigation work along their right of way and Stockbridge, I believe. Now I want to say Starksboro and Stockbridge. God darn it. And somewhere in Vermont. Yeah, it was in Addison County. Addison County as a part of the major disaster declaration is because there just wasn't enough damages in that. Why weren't there enough damages in Addison County? Well, because they didn't lose power. I mean, they did lose power in certain territories, but Vermont Electric Co-op didn't lose enough power because they had done that. They had a very short power outage, on and on, about damage and cost avoidance. But hindsight being 2020, law was not written with a focus on climate adaptation. It was written with a climate adaptation as a second thought, and oh, it would be nice to also do this. Fortunately, we're experiencing that on a day-to-day basis, like we will today in the next couple of days, when we have a heavy wet snowfall, and we will have people with power outages in Windham and Bennington counties, in the high places, and you know, a lot of that damage could be avoided. Not all of it, but a lot of it could be avoided with appropriate mitigation strategies.
So I've been listening to the conversation, and what's jumped out at me are things that Lauren has said, beautifully echoed by what Erica just brought up. And it goes to David's point about what is the role of this body, and I am so hung up on it. And I think it's become an elephant in the room. We have two lawyers evidently present who are telling us what the act says, others who have different views, and this council has never squarely addressed, are we an advisory body or not? And Lauren and David have perfectly demonstrated what happens when we take an advisory view. We start thinking about things differently as opposed to being data and result oriented. Not a bad thing to be data and result oriented, but you have to ask yourself, can a body like this realistically administer its mission with those types of objectives in mind? And I come from a world where I'm very comfortable with deliberation. A lot of people are not. And so I gravitate toward thinking of this body as an advisory body where we deliberate priorities and the like, set a course, and then find it's not just implementers, it's also people who analyze.
Or people who've asked our opinion, like
And
the
then,
legislature.
I think the most profound thing you said today, of the many profound things you've said, and you know I'm not flattering you. You know that I will support you very vehemently in confidence. You pointed to the importance of political reality. Yes, we did. And to good effect. Realism is so very important, and that jumps out when you listen to Erica and Lauren talk about the reality of needing to be resilient in the face of things we're challenged with climate, not just hoping to bring down emissions that may or may not be realistic to achieve on this timeline. So before I be quiet and leave, because I actually have to go prepare for that storm, and this is one of the many ways in which Erica is truthed out in saying that the work of this council, valuable, important, has a cost. And that cost is one that Vermont cannot continue to pay, which is to divert this much executive attention consistently to just the work of this council. The thing I would leave with this council to think about is when we started out, we had to achieve a certain thing under the statute. We never stopped to ask, is state government, is the government of Vermont at levels other than state built to do this? And if not, how would it need to be reimagined in order to do it? Now, the creation of the climate office is one example of how we can adapt our institutions, and with that, our implementers, our analyzers, our budgeters, to the work that needs to be. But how we even ask ourselves, is what we have presently geared to do this work? And in my opinion, it is not. It was Starksboro. Glad we got that kind of.
I think it's interesting too. I was thinking about, appreciate what June said. I like the advisory thinking and I capture deliberation as well. I think it's the only way you actually move forward with anything that can hope to work, because you have to have enough diversity of opinions around the table to say this is what's real for me and this is what's real for you and what can we piece together. And I think that that's more what I meant is it has felt to me at points that there's a fear component built into the GWSA and this what I would see as a bit of a myopic focus on emissions reduction that I think is hindering our ability to think most creatively about how you use your dollars and your people effectively to implement the changes that I think would check off the boxes eventually anyway. But if you change the theory of change by which you're approaching trying to get to them, you can sometimes accomplish the same goal. Those carbon emissions could go down. But the thing that I think about it as the farm and forest sector representative is we're both trying to maintain this net zero thing for 2050. But some of the other goals we're putting forward are compromising the variability of that sector to maintain the ability to hold at the level that they need to maintain the net zero target in 2050. But it has felt at points like if you're a person that's approaching these issues from a different lived experience or a different prioritization framework or implementation framework, there can be a component in these rooms that you're not focused on the most important thing. I think it's just that's the beauty of having different expertise in a room is I'm thinking about how I would get myself and my sector there. That's going to look a lot different. It's still really important though, but it might mean that adaptation and resilience is the priority in that sector, because without that, all of the things that we're counting on them to provide for that 2050 goal disappear automatically because we're putting it through a framework that isn't how that sector is going to approach it, if that makes sense. And so how do we take the target, the legal framework, the target of the Global Warming Solutions Act, but adapt it to the needs that we're identifying in this room and put our own theory of change on it? You know, how are we going to get here without leaving behind or without thinking about every way that you could get to that goal, not just one way?
I'm ready. Go ahead, Joey.
Well, I very much appreciate that, and a lot of the comments that have been made. I mean, as someone who works for an organization that pushed for the Global Warming Solutions Act, we did it because we wanted to call the question on the greenhouse gas emission requirements, not because we didn't think the other things like resilience and adaptation were important. We fundamentally do, and we now fundamentally have a framework in place that we can build from, and we have a plan in place that we can build from that we didn't have before, and it worked. We have a climate action office in place that we can do the work within. And I think we fundamentally need to focus our work, and I look forward to the opportunity in the next 2 years. It feels like we have a moment to focus on the public engagement piece. We have a plan that offers the broad framework that I think we were asked to deliver. I do think we're an advisory body. I think though that our advisory nature requires us to come up with a plan that is in line with the law, and the Global Warming Solutions Act is the law. It's not the only policy that we're going to need. We're going to need a lot of laws and a lot of policies, and maybe we can recommend coming up with a way for the legislature to measure the resilience and adaptation that we know we need for a variety of reasons that you just so eloquently articulated. I don't look at it as either or. It is now, we're in a pickle. It is a both and. And I don't want us to pit one against the other. And then I do think we do have 2 years to, I think, do the work in a limited nature through the subcommittees to ask people, go to the, go to the work at the local level, engage the constituencies to say, this is our broad framework. I fundamentally don't see the messy and imperfect plan that we put forward as changing radically over the course of time. It's fundamentally the framework that we're going to need. I mean, will it iterate? I do think there are 2 big gaps with the biomass and transportation piece, but fundamentally, that's the core. We did the messy, hard work, and now we can build from it.
Liz joined us, and both introduce yourself and come up to the table. We have a place here, a place there. There's seats.
I was hoping to show up right at the break.
Well, we're a little behind.
Not instructive. I'm Liz Miller. I am the representative from the utility sector appointed by the House of Representatives.
Something just fell.
Morning.
So I wanted to make 2 points. One is to sort of echo a lot of what we just heard and say that we're completely and totally in line with a lot of the national efforts in this space, where mitigation and adaptation, resilience are all co-equal. And we're all trying to figure out how to do it in a way that makes sense for whatever part or region of the country we're in. So it's not incongruous with everything, like I said, being co-equal. The other thing is, Catherine, you had asked us at the beginning what we thought success might look like. And so I just wanted to put out some of my thoughts there because they don't necessarily fit into one of those 4, because I like to do this sort of overarching cross-cutting thing. So go back to some of the pieces that Abby was talking about. If we take a systems thinking approach to all of the things that we're trying to do, we're not going to miss anything. And again, some of the June was raising earlier, because we're trying to make sure that everybody who needs to be at the table is at the table. So that's one piece of there. Another thing that I think we can put out to sort of bring organizations together is, sometimes we have a hub and spokes model with one thing in the middle and everything kind of goes out. What if we sort of turn that on the head and alternate who's the hub, so that we can be the hub at some times, and then other groups can be the hub at other times, and we just play off our expertise to make sure that, again, everybody's being heard, everybody's expertise is being brought to bear. And then I think one word that we have not heard a lot of in here so far is trust. And we need to build trust. We need to have time to have trust. And we need to become trusted brokers. Because none of this is going to move forward if nobody trusts what we're trying to do.
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. Letting us step back to see the bigger picture. You said systems thinking, become trusted brokers, and the other thing that you said in the middle was sort of flip the hub and spokes model on its head.
Yeah.
And I missed the sort of the implication of that.
So usually if the hub is in the center and we're sort of going out or waiting for folks to come to us or so on, have enough space to have other groups, the ones who are already doing a lot of this work. I think we heard that repeatedly around the table, be the hub, and we can do the spoke at some point in time. So it's okay to do that as well, if we have enough trust to do it.
Can I clarify, are you referring to our subcommittees as the spokes or actual organizations in the world doing the work?
Organizations. Yeah, I'm thinking bigger. Yeah. Thinking whole state here. Yeah.
Yes. So I didn't want to kind of derail the substantive conversation that we were all having, but seeing that there's nothing in the governance.
Yes.
I'll jump to the mundane technical governance stuff. So some of what I heard a couple of folks talk about is with respect to the update required by the GWSA and how that's not going to be the same work as the original plan. Certainly agree, but I think there's an opportunity now for us to kind of codify what that update process looks like. And how we anticipate updating the plan to ensure that we're not taking on a rewrite of the initial climate action plan. Also, with respect to governance and process, I think we have mentioned the addendums, but the initial process documents don't really contemplate those and how they get incorporated and what that looks like. So I want to make sure we don't lose that focus. I think there needs to be some sort of consensus on how we adopt addendums and where they go and how they fit to
If I can just build on that for just the public engagement and outreach piece around addendums specifically is something I think we need to talk about. We've had a broad public engagement process to support the climate action plan, but then have these other pieces that haven't necessarily had the same.
So you're just saying if we're going to take on addendums, we need a specific targeted public engagement?
Well, I think it's a question. Do we? Should we? Maybe.
Yes. Oh, goodness. Okay, Sue and Kelly.
Yeah, I wanted to just raise up, and I don't know where it belongs exactly, but we've talked about resilience and adaptation, and I do want to just put on this equity and recognize that as we, take on a listening / advisory role, that we remember, and I think that our public engagement process will have that we truly try to build trust by those who are least trusting, most impacted, most vulnerable, and potentially least aware of many things. And as we've done a lot of outreach in a lot of ways, we've recognized that different audiences need very different levels and types of engagement and discussion. And I just really want to make sure we don't lose that point. And I don't think we will in the presentation on whatever we're doing with upcoming public engagement, but I wanted to make sure it was on there. Because I worry deeply about sort of the impact and the disproportionate impact of so many of the big ideas we're putting forward for those who may be least aware of what's happening and the efforts to address them.
I said build trust with the most vulnerable and impacted, but your starting point was, let's not forget about the equity components.
Yeah, and requirement of of the law that we're.
One more in the room, and then I'm going to turn to the folks online.
Two more.
I was briefly going to say that I think this maybe came up at our last meeting in January, but the difference between having an addendum or a revision, and is there a difference? And when we're talking about revising, is an addendum a revision, or is it just an addendum? Or that's just a governance question. I didn't want to lose track of.
Have an answer, June?
I do.
Okay.
By definition means you're adding to, revision means you're changing something.
Which is what I assume would be the case, but what is the process? And is there a different process we need to adopt to approve an addendum versus a revision?
In my opinion, no.
I'm just, I think, open question, like.
We need to have a clear approach.
Like, what is our plan around it?
So is there a timing component of the difference between an addendum and a revision too? Because clearly the revision, you have a deadline of July 2025. There has to be a revised plan. Addendums are perhaps more urgent, more things that have, or are gaps that need to be filled in the existing plan. I'm actually looking to you for clarification.
And also, we can revise it before that date. It says at least every 4 years. Right. So that's just another thing put out there.
I think it's an open question, like we may want to do small revisions along the way.
So I would say there's a question under governance of, codify what's the process for revision and addendums, and also what is it? And at what point would you want to actually have an addendum versus wait for a final revision? Is that what you're saying? there's things along the way you want to update.
Yeah, I guess what I am hoping we could find is a way to revise parts of the plan without waiting for a full official 4-year deadline revision. Because we're going to learn more and we're going to hear more from different communities, and we're going to realize we screwed stuff up and we want to fix it, and don't want to kind of revise the whole plan. We just want to revise little things.
So back to
Yes.
to your point, we've learned, we changed based on learning. I think the significance in the statute of having a mandated revision time is that the makeup of the council also changes. And so that becomes the point in time when the plan is due for revision by the council as it exists at that time. You're speaking of revisions that this makeup might now undertake, which as far as I'm concerned, but what I was getting at is that the authority pursuant to which an addendum or a revision is undertaken.
Yeah.
And the process of the county so that the import of it or the function of it are not the same. That helps.
Do you wanted to say something?
Yes, if I could. I come from 30 years of experience where you put your name on the product. And as I understand it, this council doesn't vote.
Oh, God bless you.
Yeah.
And I at least want to put it out there for discussion that in fact, in order to hold the council accountable and an individual member of the council accountable, that in fact, people should vote. That said, there is a method for handling and being able to engage minority opinions, and they're called minority reports. And it's not seldom that it happens, but it certainly has happened in the legislative and administrative processes where minority reports are delivered because 5 members of the council really felt strongly that they didn't want to be associated with the position of the overall council. So,
Clarification around decision-making, or you making some changes.
yeah, and the point is to hold council members accountable. And this is not a pejorative statement on my part, but if all of the administration people voted one way and all the other council members voted the other way, I think the public ought to know that. Just.
From my point of view, David, and it's not lost on me that I think one of the most significant actions the council took, again, was a vote.
Yeah, we did.
We voted on.
Yes, you and I didn't hear the.
Yeah, I said one of the most significant actions the council ultimately took was to vote on whether to adopt the plan that we ultimately came up with in December. But you're right, the decision-making process up to that point was, it was all over the place, and I had a lot of patience with that because, you know, we're trying to do something we never done. And there's a great emphasis placed in this.
Building the plane and putting the fuel in.
Precisely, and
yeah,
flying the country
yeah, yeah.
and deciding whether that storm's one we can fly through. Do we have enough fuel, et cetera, with no budget. Anyway, we undertook these many different mechanisms for making decisions, and there's great emphasis on consensus sifting building. And a shout out to you and to for having guided us through that as best as I think anybody could. But it has always bothered me that at the end of the day, there are elements of that consensus building that have felt false to me. And that is where we should have simply had.
Or a minority report.
And we weren't always clear about what, well, we had one minority report after the vote on the plan. And I think that is an area how we make decisions could improve. And I think it's time for, with the maturity of the council, for us to own a little more that the consensus building process is not built into the statute. And when, to the point Leslie Ann's making and others have made about trust, you know, absent trust, I think you have to vote.
And I can just build on that, knowing you want to go into lunch.
Yeah, I'm just gonna make sure they get a chance to get in here.
Sure, I'll be quick, which is just, I think sort of to the points about voting too, is we took the the plan as a whole, in adopting it, initially. And this speaks to addendums and whether you're gonna take those as individual matters when previously we spoke to the plan as a whole. But I think, looking at that approval mechanism, whether it's trying to gain consensus or starting to break it into some of its composite parts, is an important conversation for us to have, particularly if revisions are going to pertain to specific sections. We didn't go through an action by action, sector by sector. It was sort of whole plan up or down, and then the minority report from the administration was focused on a narrow handful of specific actions that we didn't see a path to yes for. But I do think thinking sort of about the plan as a whole and then specific its component parts is going to be really important going.
A lot of work on continued conversation around decision making. Rich and Lily, we're about to close up this part of the conversation. So did you have anything you wanted to add?
Well, as I said before, a lot of good comments in the room. I have 4 responses, I guess. I agree with many of the things that have been said. I'd like to start with the fact that this conversation reveals that there's a disconnect between the breadth of the mission given to the council in the GWSA by the legislature and the level of support that the legislature is given to the council to fulfill the mission. I think we need to, in dealing with that, we kind of need to speak honestly to the legislature about that disconnect. And in the meantime, I think we need to prioritize the things that we think are most important and then ask for staff support as needed, or to engage other forms of support from outside the council to work on those things. So we're dealing inside this big disconnect, frankly, and we have been from the beginning. The second point is I fully agree with the comments that we are created principally as an advisory body. And in order to be good at being an advisory body, we have to engage in a much more open and positive process of active listening. And a lot of the conversation this morning has been around that. Third, we do have a responsibility as an advisory body, not simply to, sort of opine randomly, but rather to report to the legislature on progress and gaps. And here I mean not just reporting on how well is the plan being implemented, that is focusing on sort of the issues that we've identified in the plan, but rather in the big picture, how well is Vermont doing in achieving the multiple goals that are set out in the GWSA? So we can perform a really important role as a reporter, or sometimes they say speaking truth to power. I think we also need to be in the listening mode. So I kind of want to soften that phrase, but we exist as a unique body that can prepare a report to the legislature, identifying how much progress we're making, how much progress still needs to be made. And then my fourth point is to echo Lauren's point, which I think also was touched on by Bram and some others, on our multiple goals. We do need to focus on all of the major goals set out in the GWSA. And I think that means that at the committee level, to break down the silos, I think that there ought to be organized times when, Committee A presents ideas to Committee B, and, then they discuss it jointly. We do need to make sure that we're addressing all of the goals, and that we, if it means that we have to meet in joint committee meetings, I think we should do that. That's it. Thank you. Lily, I think you're up if you want to be.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I really disagree with everything that's been said. I don't really have anything else to add. I think that people brought up some important points about like trying to better define like what our role in the implementation is, and that we do need to do a better job of like outsourcing and connecting with local businesses and professionals who are already doing this work and like taking advantage of that.
A few, so I am like Secretary Clouser, and I'm like a very task oriented, love getting into the mundane. And an effort to not opine randomly, which is a really great phrase that Rich just used. I'd love to just I want some of my like discrete tasks to be thrown up there before we move on from this conversation. So I wholeheartedly agree that our decision making to date has been fundamentally flawed. And I think that our draft process roadmap needs to just be reviewed, updated, and or totally overhauled. My recommendation for that would be that instead of just saying that's something that we need to do, that a subset of people, maybe from across the different subcommittees, so that there's those different perspectives, is like tasked with, you all come up with recommended changes to the process roadmap that can be reviewed and approved by the council. We keep saying that we're building the plane while flying it. I wholeheartedly agree and also disagree, only because this process isn't unique to Vermont. The IPCC, and you'll hear like a couple of us, Jared, Ryan, and Leslie Ann and myself, we use that acronym a lot, has all of this like already laid out. It says, for any climate planning, you must include adaptation and resilience. So we don't need to debate that. The international community tells us we have to. The international community also has already come up with, for climate plans, you should use these criteria for prioritization. I recommend that somebody, maybe another subset, look at those recommendations for how we prioritize and tweak it to Vermont standards if need be, but it covers the geopolitical, the socioeconomic, the technical feasibility, the impact bang for your buck. Like all of that has been laid out from an international body that has people far smarter than the average of us here. And so I want to say that I just want those discrete tasks figured out. And then I think that also for the process and governance, we need a process that we can all agree to for how we receive and incorporate public comment. Because we did create that, thanks to state staff who created that portal, but we didn't really ever figure out a way, how is it going to be discussed, what was sent in, and how do we then incorporate or not those comments. So those are my 3 or 4 discrete tasks that I think need to be handled by a group or subset of this council.
And you will get a chance to answer that or ask that specific question about what is the feedback loop, or how is the public comment can be communicated to the council and vice versa? What is the communication mechanism between you and public engagement? So we're going to come back to that too. All right, I want to give everybody a chance to stand up, take a break. probably don't have as much time as we had hoped, since we've already, whatever, about 30 minutes, but I'll give you 10. How's that? And then we'll try to get started. We're gonna come back and,
Kevin, I think lunch was scheduled at 12, so why,
12:30, isn't it?
oh, it was at 12:30, okay. Do you
So-
want to just move it up and then that way we're not.
I don't think we have it.
I don't think we had no lunch. Is it, can we take like a 1 minute stand up break and then just say that
Stand
would be
up and
good?
touch your
Lunch
toes
easier
and
to try and
sit down.
meet our deadline. If That's okay with. Quick back break. Absolutely not. 2 minutes.
I can get back as quickly as possible. Keep going.
So turn that back on again. I was wondering if there was like feedback coming from the heating system when David was trying to talk. Spell your last name.
Melton.
Melton. I think that's what I wrote down. Not Milton, Melton.
Melton, yeah. I think engineers used to be the same name and people just spelled them differently. Yeah, so now there are two.
Excellent. Thank you.
How are you?
And he just says, we did the recovery.
Lauren, I keep coming back in my mind, so like. I know that I hazard mitigation plans. Hazard mitigation plans, all the local hazard mitigation plans, and it's just like, yes, we need to like know this work is going on, but do we need to do it again? You know, in this body, like how to do things communicate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, ideally, a lot of the most important actions to have are being elevated there. Yeah, this plan
And then she also. So the next piece of this is to spend some time actually taking some of the work we've already done, and think about what does that look like on a timeline over the next 2 years? What are the major milestones that you want to see accomplished? And again, some of this is an abstract because we haven't really specifically said, it's going to be this addendum or that addendum, but you may have in your own minds if there's, for instance, you talked about the biomass task force, taking that up. Put that on the agenda or on your timeline. We're going to do this in, lost my notes because I can't remember. We're going to do this in groups. But I wanted you to maybe, so I think what I'm going to do is just ask you to count off so that we have a mix, and then we'll have you kind of move to 4 different areas. So if we count off and okay, how many?
Sue will be right back.
Say, let's make this 3 groups. Work in groups of 5.
Well, you still got there and Sue coming back, right?
They're gonna be carried on the computer over to a group. So, all right, well, let's make it.
It's going to be staying and going forward for the work.
No.
How long are these groups going to last? Because the point where TJ needs to sub in as my delegate.
Just for this session.
Okay.
Just for this session.
Session just goes until lunch, I think, right?
Mhm.
So
Next
are you
45
meeting
minutes.
before lunch or?
I will, if that's what we're doing here, yes, then you
Oh,
can sub in for me and I will give you all my love and let you know that it's time for the store.
Go get him.
Thank you very much.
Keep it safe.
And new members, welcome and thank you.
Thank you.
Julie, I hope to hear from you more.
And Catherine, if I could, just for 1 minute, so everybody knows, TJ Poor, I'm the Director of Planning at the Public Service Department, and I'll be designee for the rest of the day.
Well, he will also be representing you more regularly on the council, so please be guided if you need to know the department position by TJ, unless I make a point telling you that I'm going to.
Hi, June.
I call that no pressure.
To be as eloquent or articulate.
That's a good thing.
So I'm just going to count off let's make 4 groups. So we go 1 to 4, back to your school days, 1 to 4, 1 to 4, and then we're going to break up and I'm going to put you in different parts of the room and you're going to work together on this timeline exercise. And then we're going to share it and you'll have time over lunch to look at everybody else's timeline. We'll talk about it a little bit more after lunch. How's that? So, Liz, can I ask you to start with 1 until round?
2,
3, 4, 1,
2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3,
4,
1,
2,
3, 4.
1. Rich, you're 2, and Lily, can we just put them in the same room together? Because that way you don't have two computers moving around. So one group will be bigger. You're both 2s.
Make Sue a 3.
And you're 3. You're 3. You're 3. You're group 3. So, where's Jane? Jane was going to carry.
She's on the phone with all of it.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to give you each a piece of paper. And you can, what I'm asking you to do is to take this piece of poster paper, break it into quarters over the next 2 years, beginning with today and ending with July 2025. And spend some time thinking about the major mileposts in your work over the next 2 years. I invite you to be as detailed as you want, or probably easier just to start out with the big picture when you want to get the major things you think done. Think about some of the tasks that you've already identified. And I'm going to move you, let's have group 1 be at this corner, group 2 be at that end, group 3 here, and then I'm going to put group 4, yes.
In that room.
No, not the room, but I think
Oh, back here.
over here. So 1 can be at this end and more than over there. Each piece of paper to start working with. What you might want to do is pull your chairs around the other side.
You're supposed to
I
be.
can lift them over if you're facing each other and you're not all here.
Oh, okay.
We're in three.